Hi, before I get started, I'm just going to ask you guys some questions. Raise your hand if you are currently working on a software project of some kind. Okay, good, I'm in the right room. How about, are you working on a greenfield project? Let's say like less than 3 months old. So are you working on something shiny and new? Nice, cool, okay. Less than 6 months old? A year? 2 years? 3 years? 5 years? Are you guys feedback good? All right, 10 years. Okay, hands down, that's a lot of maintenance. I was talking to my uncle who came through town. I was trying to explain what my talk was about. And I was like, yeah, conferences are great. And people tell you about the things that were always there that you didn't know about, like the coverage module, or things that you, like, let me make sure this gets back on. Or like, things that you could be doing better, like pair programming with nonviolent communication. And it's great, and everybody talks about all these new things. My talk is not one of those talks. My talk is about what we spend a lot of our time doing, which is maintenance. I've been building applications with Rails and Phoenix and Django and a smattering of other frameworks for almost 10 years. And the more software I write, the more I think that maintenance matters. And considering maintainability matters. And that minute for minute, the time and the investment you put into writing maintainable code and maintainable software is some of the best time that you spend. And that stuff gets deprioritized a lot, but it is really important. So here I am taking the sleepy 3 p.m. slot to talk about maintenance. I work at a company called Viget. We're a consultancy, which means that I build software for other people. I've been working there about 7 years, and it's great. It's a great place to work. And one of the things I love about working at Viget is that we're not experts in any one thing, but we are experts in building software. So we spend a lot of time talking about how to do that a little bit better. And for me, a lot of it comes back to thinking about maintainability and doing the little things right and building strong foundations. This is our office. I work out of our Durham office where I work. And I know some of you are kind of around, so feel free to come by anytime. We're right downtown. All right, without spoiling my first point, my goal here is not to blow your mind. My goal here is to talk about some of the simple things, the fundamentals. My guess is that you have heard and thought about all of the things that I will say, but I would be shocked if anyone is doing them all of the time consistently. So my hope is just to kind of inspire us to do those little things as developers that make our job as developers later easier. So that's what we're doing. Without further ado, here are 10 kind of quick hit things that you can do to make maintaining your Rails application just a little bit easier. And most of these ideas apply regardless of the stack. Number 1, code review. If you are lucky enough to work on a team, you should be doing code review all of the time. Code review does not have to be and really should not be some senior dev signing off on some junior dev's work. Code review should be a conversation. Hey, I wrote this code. Here it is. People can ask questions. What's going on here? People can say, oh, I like this. I learned something new. And the benefits of code review compound. The more people see everybody's stuff, the more everybody knows about the code base, the more good conversations happen. This is from this week. I'm working on a honestly shiny new greenfield app, and it's great. I did just a small thing, and one of the guys I'm working with is like, hey, why isn't this in here? And I was like, well, I didn't really think about it that hard, but here's why. And he was like, oh, great. We took this offline, talked about it on Slack, ended up with a resolution, and now we have made a better decision for the application that everybody knows just because we have code review. But don't just say you do code review. Require it. Go into GitHub, make the setting. You shouldn't be able to merge a PR without a second set of eyes on it. And like, I'm not saying that sometimes you're not going to Slack someone and be like, oh my God, give me a thumbs up, this has to go to production now. That will happen. But making it easier to do the better thing and a little bit harder to do the wrong hacky thing has long-term implications on the health of your code base. And this doesn't matter if you're working on a 10-year-old app. You can set this right now in whatever platform you're using to host your code. Number 2, linting. I am down to have a conversation with any of you about tabs versus spaces or how to align your hashes or whatever. That can be really fun. Code review and like when I'm trying to get stuff done is not the time for that conversation. I don't want to have any of those conversations when I could be thinking about more important things. I like to have standardized formatting on every project, and I like to enforce it, and then you can have that conversation with a computer instead. We use pre-commit a lot to do a bunch of things. This is pretty flexible. You can use it with different languages and different frameworks. I highly suggest checking it out. What's nice is you get a local hook, and you can then enforce it on CI, and everything just happens automatically. So it's not just that your build fails, but like, hey, I tried to commit this code, and it won't let me until everything is formatted and organized. With Python, it like organizes, we use, I think, Black and ISort to like organize our imports, and it does a lot of good stuff. So recommending pre-commit for that. For Ruby, I really like standard Ruby, and what I like about it is it cannot be configured. There's no time to even have that conversation. I feel like I once brought Rubocop onto an app to try to prevent having that conversation, and then we had a long conversation about the PR that brought Rubocop onto the app. Again, I'm trying to avoid that because I want to think about the more interesting problems. So I really like standard Ruby because it just does it. It might be a testable. Is that from testable? Thanks. I use this on Ruby, but we also use pre-commit, and we also lint our JavaScript, all that kind of stuff. But similarly, don't just say you do it, enforce it on CI. Your build should fail if your formatting standards are not met. Yes, this is annoying, but yes, it keeps your code much more readable and much more standardized over time. And all this stuff, if you run this with fix locally, it'll do the fixing for you. You don't have to think about it. And you can do this on an existing app, right? Like just lint your whole app, like set some formatting standards, run it with autofix, and like now you have this, even if you're working on an older application. So again, I think setting standards is important, but I think enforcing them is a big part of that. And over time, the payout for maintainability is very high. I don't have time in this talk, but ask me about one of my few open source contributions in which I made the Rubocop hash alignment cop stricter. It was the default one, and a lot of people yelled at me on the internet because broke their builds. Number 3, good tests. There's a million things to say about tests, but for maintenance, I'm going to define good tests as tests that fail when your application does not do what it should do, and pass when it does do what it should do. You should be writing those tests. There's a lot of different kinds of tests that are really valuable, serve a lot of purposes. I'm going to focus on feature tests or integration tests right now, because those, I think, are the ones that really give you kind of the infrastructure that allows you to maintain and refactor and upgrade an application easily. Again, don't just have tests. Your build should fail if your tests don't pass. Yes, it can be annoying, but like, how many times have you like pulled something, you want to work on it, and like the build happens to be failing, and like the annoyance of that is way more than the annoyance of like whatever you had to do to fix the thing to ship your feature. So have that fight with the computer early. I think that this is just another example of trying to make it easier to do the right thing than to do the quick hacky thing. Not that that never happens, but the easier you make it to write maintainable code, the better your life as a maintainer is going to be in the long term. GitHub should look like this. It should be yelling at you when you don't have code review, when your tests aren't passing. And I know you can get around this, but you should have to click like 3 red buttons to like merge something. Like it's like sometimes you have to do it, but you should feel bad about it. And that's what I think that this does. Just makes it easier to do the right thing, the maintainable thing. As a bonus for writing tests, I worked in a lot of languages, a lot of frameworks, and I really do believe that Ruby has basically the best suite of really easy, really usable in-language feature tests. I think this stuff is great. I like RSpec. I really agree with a lot of stuff about the bad parts, so don't abstract your tests. Like your code can have abstractions, your test should not. But yeah, RSpec, Capybara, you put a Selenium driver on there, and you can test a lot of Rails application behavior really, really easily. Writing the language that you already know. So write good tests. And if you're writing tests, you should be enforcing test coverage for all of the same reasons, right? I think high test coverage is necessary but not sufficient to have good tests, but I do think it helps. And this is probably the most controversial thing I will say. We like to use simple cov down at the bottom there, and I like to enforce test coverage at 100%. It's a little brutal, but I think it is fine if there are things that shouldn't be covered. Some finicky integration for asset storage that's like only ever matters on a deployed environment, like maybe you're not testing that. Some exception in a case statement that you're hoping never gets hit, that's fine. But you just wrap it in a no-cov, right? And at least that way it's documented that that's not tested. So I like to enforce test coverage at 100%, but then I'm very okay with occasionally saying this thing isn't covered in the test. So you can just drop your no-cov right in there, and then some other developer who's doing maintenance later knows what's covered and what's not. You can also ratchet, you can also just like slap test coverage on an existing app. Put it in there, see what it is right now, and maybe your test coverage is 54%. Set your test coverage at 54%. Don't let it fall below that, and then ratchet it up over time. This isn't something that you can only do if you're starting from scratch. And also, like, if you want to do 95, 95 is fine, but it's not a hill I'm going to die on. Again, we usually use an environment variable, just like at the top of the Rails helper. But if you are talking about test coverage, you should be enforcing test coverage. Your build should fail, and you should not be able to merge your PR unless your coverage threshold is met. Standards are not standards unless they're enforced. And over time, I really think that this kind of stuff pays off, although this is the one that annoys me the most. Like, I've done like 3 days of work and like, ta-da, it's beautiful, and then it's like, no, this one line isn't covered, no, you gotta do it all again. Not everything, but push up your PR and stuff. So it can be annoying, but I think it's worth it. Number 5, helpful logs. This is my favorite one. Logs are mostly for developers. How often have somebody been like, hey, weird behavior is happening, and you're like, okay, and then 10 minutes later, you're like grepping your logs for really anything that might be relevant. A lot of us don't think about our logs until we're in that situation, and I think that's a mistake. This is Hex. Fun story, I was working on a system, and people would buy zoo tickets, and then we would email the zoo tickets to the people. Pretty cool system, but a lot of money moving around, a lot of kind of moving parts, and a weird thing was happening, and somebody said, Annie, can you figure out what's happening? And so I turn on the debug level logs on one of the staging servers, and great, now I'm looking, and I see this. It turns out, at that log level, Rails prints out the contents of all your emails, which is great, thank you. If your emails include attachments, like several pages of zoo ticket PDFs, it converts them to hex and prints them out in the logs. Every time an email was being sent, I got tens of thousands of lines of this. Now, you can still search in that, but one, that's a terrible performance thing. Even if it's like a debug on an integration server, like this, nobody wants this. It only took 20 minutes to go figure out where that payload was, override it, tell it to only print out the names of the attachments, but all of a sudden my logs were useful again. You deployed that, all of a sudden I could say, oh, this happened around this time, I see everything that happened around that time, we fixed the bug. Take stuff out of your logs that isn't doing anybody any favors. On the flip side, it is trivially easy to tell a computer to write to a file. If stuff is happening in your application that you think you will want to know about, something you want to know at the beginning of every request, right? Like maybe a multi-tenant application, just print out the tenant at the beginning of every request. Like how much more searchable are your logs if you do that? Rails makes this very easy. Pro tip, you should do blocks for your Rails logging statements. It means it'll only evaluate the code in there depending on the log level. So this way it's like this is only going to get evaluated if info stuff should get evaluated. So if you have like a debug statement that has a lot going on, anyway, do it in a block. The logs explain that way, the docs explain that way better than I just did. But not only can you print stuff out that might be useful, I'm a big fan of making custom log files. I am especially a big fan of this for things that are happening in the background. So background processes, background jobs, or cron jobs, things like that. Because let's say like every day at 2 a.m. I pull in a bunch of data and then people for prices of things, and people are using that all day long. If a price is wrong, if the user says, hey, this price is wrong, there's a whole lot of stuff that could have happened to make that wrong. But I think maybe it has to do with a cron job. I love to have, in basically any cron job I'm writing, say something like, hey, start the cron job. Any really super relevant data, like, hey, here are the prices I pulled for these products. End the cron job. It's, in this case, it's writing to a specific file called log, log cron.log. And I have exactly the information I need. So if something's going weird with the prices, I can just go check that log, open it up, and know right away if that's the source of the issue. I've found that to be really valuable, and it is, like I said, trivially easy to do. Computers are good at writing to files. That's basically what they do. While I'm talking about logs, I have to say, take care of your production logs. Make sure they're rotating properly, make sure they're backed up properly. If you've got a bunch of different servers, you should be aggregating your logs. A little bit of attention paid ahead of time to your logs is the difference between, I don't know why that's happening, sorry, and I can't figure it out, and having a lot of information kind of at your fingertips really quickly. I would say this is the thing that I like doing the most, and then neglect. I often will sort of neglect it and then be like, oh, I knew I should have done that. I knew I should have had a little bit more logging in here. So if nothing else, I hope you're all thinking about your logs just a little bit. Number 6, thoughtful launches. I think that part of writing a feature, especially a new feature in a big existing system, you should also be thinking about not just how that feature should work, but how you're going to get your app to that place, right? If your plan to launch a big new feature is to have a big long-running feature branch, merge it in, deploy the code, run a whole bunch of migrations, and hope, that could work, and sometimes it does. But if it doesn't, that's like a bad day, right? That's the that migration wasn't reversible. Has anyone had that day? I have had that day. That's tough, and that stuff can really be mitigated ahead of time. So my first real thought on launches is if there's any way to have all your code running in production before your launch, get that done. Even if it means maintaining kind of a separate, a little bit of double data or whatever, get it done. That way, you know that your stuff doesn't break existing stuff, right? And your launch can be as simple as, exposing the new stuff. And in that scenario, you're very unlikely to be trying to desperately reverse a migration at 4 p.m. on a Friday, because of course it is. There's a million ways to do this, but simply speaking, I say figure out some way to do feature flags, right? You can just throw it in your code like this, right? This could just be a method at the bottom of the controller that says, if you're an admin, show it for admin testing. Or it could be, if this environment variable, awesome new feature, is set, show it, otherwise don't. That's no dependency, no database, no anything, just an environment variable. And in that world, you've deployed your code long before you're launching your feature. And your launch is just change the environment variable, restart the app, and hope it works. And if it doesn't, your panic plan is change the environment variable, restart the app, fix your bug. In that scenario, fixing your bug, maintaining your application is I'll get to it tomorrow morning. It is not 4 p.m. on a Friday, fire mode. This can get more sophisticated depending on what you're doing. If you're doing something where there's a big system, a lot of people are using it, I'll use the zoo tickets again as an example. We built a whole e-commerce system, and we were switching over from an old e-commerce system. Thousands of people every day spending a shocking amount of money on zoo tickets. If you try to go to the Bronx Zoo, you should bring extra money. It's very expensive. So we're not just going to launch this new system and hope that the thousands of people spending tens of thousands of dollars, it's all going to work. If anything is wrong, that's thousands of customer service complaints. That's a very bad day for me. That's trying to get people their money back. I do not want that. So when we launched this new e-commerce system, instead of just a flag, a yes/no flag, we had a % to new system flag. And we routed, our launch was we had an environment variable that we went from 0 to 5. And then 5% of people were routed to the new system. And we kept an eye on it. And if it was going well, we then changed that environment variable to 10. And so on over the next course of a week. When something went wrong, we changed it to 0, fixed the bug, started the process all over again. In that scenario, it is okay if something goes wrong. And it wasn't, it wasn't that hard to write code that split that traffic, but it saved us from a very, very stressful launch. So as far as like maintenance goes, anything you can do to avoid putting yourself in that situation is really, really valuable. And if nothing else, get your code on production before your launch. That's my biggest thought there. Number 7, timely upgrades. I wish I had a silver bullet here. This is tough. A couple of years ago, I ended up writing a whole blog post about how we had this app running, and SendGrid was like, no more username and password, use your API key. So I thought I could just like swap an environment variable on Heroku and move on with my life. And I was like, we had like a junior dev. I was like, come on, man, like we'll do it together. I'll like show you Heroku. It'd be great. Like 7 hours later, I was like upgrading Ruby. I was upgrading Rails. Heroku had like EOL'd that Ubuntu version. And then like we were all like going out on like 10 days of PTO. And I was like, by the way, guys, staging is down, and I'll see you in next year. All I can say is that like it is worth thinking about your upgrades. Like whatever you got to do to fight for that time to get that prioritized, like it is worth it. I think Dependabot is pretty cool. A lot of people think it's pretty annoying, but like if I can offload some of that task, then great. So I suggest trying it. But mostly it's just a thing like I know I have many projects in my head right now that need certain upgrades, right? Like I'm just, if I inspire one person to take the time to do that thing, then like somebody's gonna have a good day in 2 years that would have been a bad day otherwise. So that'll be my good deed, I guess. All right, number 8, helpful shortcuts. If you're a developer, there's a thing you're doing all the time in an application. Document it. There are a million ways to do this. Rails actually has a bunch of cool ways to like customize the shell. So if you're like always doing the same searches and stuff, you can do that. That stuff is really valuable because not only is it now easier to do the thing, but any new dev coming on the project or future you or whoever now has like a recorded, documented thing of something that you do all the time. There's a lot of ways to do this, right? You can have make files, you can mess with your shell, whatever you're going to do. But one thing that we do is like standard bin scripts. So for stuff that you need to do all the time, write bin scripts. We 100% ripped this off of the GitHub devs, so I'm not going to take credit for it, but it's pretty great. This is especially helpful now that we do most of our development with Docker, because my fingers are tired from typing Docker compose exec or Docker compose, run RM or whatever. This way, the stuff that I do all the time is really easy. And the stuff that I do all the time is recorded. So someone just go and look at these bin files and see the commands that I'm running all of the time. If that wasn't documented anywhere, somebody who's trying to do maintenance later has a much steeper learning curve. So this way I can say, I know if I run bin-cov, that's going to check the coverage locally and like open that up in the browser, right? Although honestly, I don't check coverage locally that often because that's what CI does. Bin reset, I use this all the time. Drop, create, remigrate my database, right? If I'm branch hopping back-end branches, the database is in a weird state, like I don't want to think about that. I'm just going to go ahead and reset it, and then I'm probably going to bin seed it after. Bin console, open the shell. There are a lot of these, but I think it pays off to just spend a little bit of time writing up these shortcuts in your app. And the maintainability there is that other devs have you're essentially sharing knowledge with future you or other devs, and I think that that's valuable. Leads kind of right into my next point, which is solid documentation. I will say sometimes documentation isn't always awesome, but I very rarely see a project with really good documentation and bad code. Very rarely. if you're thinking about your documentation, then you're often thinking about your code as well. This is like a checklist that we use kind of at the beginning of projects to just make sure that we've like gotten started on the right foot. So local project setup, local testing info, how to run code coverage, formatting or pre-commit stuff, how to get that installed if you don't have it, how to contribute, right? Like if, you know, various settings or like, hey, we want to tag all our commits or whatever, that should be documented. If there are a bunch of environments, put that in the README. How to deploy, put that in the README. It's like a little bit tedious, but it's really valuable. Later, also, if a new dev is coming onto a project and they're slacking you questions about how to get set up, one of you should also be opening a pull request to answer that question. Don't sort of let that stuff get more and more and more in people's heads as opposed to in the project. And my last one, and I think I've already hit this pretty hard, is if you have standards, enforce them. Make it easy to do the right thing, the maintainable thing. Make it hard to do the like sad hacky thing. Not that you won't have to sometimes. Reality is reality. But the harder you make that, the less often it happens, and over time, that really pays off. It should look like this if you haven't met the standards that you've set. And then it should look like this when it's time to merge your stuff. Here's my list again. Like I said, I don't think I've said anything that anyone doesn't already know. But I know I don't do all of this as well as I would like to all the time. And I do think it's important to talk about because we spend so much of our time doing maintenance. If nothing else, hopefully I've inspired someone to go do something that creates a good day instead of a bad day a couple years down the road. If you're curious, we recently wrote a whole blog series about this where we sort of expand on each one and some of the tools we like. You can find it on Viget.com. That's also where you can, I'm kind of hard to find on the internet, but I work at Viget and you can find me there. And that's all. Thanks.